Okay.
Okay, so I'm standing in front of a miter saw. This is a 12-inch DeWalt. Having used pretty much the full range of miter saws kind of all over the world, this is the one that is my preferred tool. It's also one of the least expensive tools as well. Now, I've been doing this for long enough that, and that's putting it politely, that I can remember woodworking without a cutoff, without a miter saw. And it was truly hell. You wanted to cut something square, you had to put a miter gauge on your table saw or lift a sled up onto the saw for one simple square cut. Whereas this has made quite a bit of difference in how I work. The first one I used, of course, which I think was the first one in the market, was a Makita. And looking back on that, it was an awkward machine with a very difficult guard. These, of course, are now much more resolved than those early ones. So this is essentially my setup here. It's on its own stand, and it's about 8 feet long, somewhere in that neighborhood. I've got one side here that's about 2 feet, and the other 6 feet is on the left-hand side. So the way this is set up, this surface is absolutely dead to the top of my table here. This setup goes back decades at least, but in any case, dead level. But interestingly enough, if you can see what I'm pointing at, I've got something which also has the stop and so on. It is set back about a shy eighth of an inch, somewhere in that neighborhood. And this has something, wood is never perfectly straight, of course. So if I had this dead level with this surface here, at that point, and this is all level, if there's any bow on the wood, it would not be square to the cut here. So I'm choosing and have chosen to make sure this is the business end of what I'm doing is happening right here. Now, some of the things that I've learned over the years that make this a useful and wonderfully accurate machine is actually the blades that I now use are 10-row blades, and I will not promote anything for pay, of course. If I like it, I'll pass it along. And so here's the saw blade. It's a 12-inch blade, and it is referred to as a 10-row Miter Pro. Now, what's a little different is this is a 100-tooth blade. If you go into a store and ask for a miter saw blade, invariably they're going to push you towards a 200 or even 300-tooth saw. And I've not found that a good idea, to put it politely, because with that many teeth, the gullet is so small that you end up generating a lot of heat, and any resin in the wood starts to gum up the blade. Whereas the 100-tooth, you got a nice big gullet. What makes it work so well is that when I'm actually using it, when I'm making a cut, I'm going kind of slowly. All right, so that sort of gives me the advantage of the big gullet, and it also gives me a smooth cut. These blades, by the way, are used kind of day in and day out, and they seem to last somewhere between 4 and 5 years before I have to send them out to get sharpened. And they're cutting virtually, you name a wood product, whether it's composite or solid wood, from Macassar ebony through to basswood. It does an absolutely excellent job on all of those divergent, those different materials. Now, you'll notice here, and I hope it's showing up, I've got lots of light around my saw. And when I need it, I can bring in like a Luxo style light. And this picks up and will simply move over to the other side if it is needed there. Now, this is a business, so I'm doing this day in and day out. There's actually two of these, and there's one right behind the camera over here. The setup's pretty much identical. It's not uncommon that I will have one of the saws set up for a specific operation, but it's certainly not necessary, to say the least, that you have two of these. Now, some of the things that make this, a big point, I almost forgot to mention it right from the get-go, and that's this, that these saws, and they're not sliders, by the way, they do tilt left and right, but they simply pivot here as opposed to sliding out. And as I mentioned before, I've used a lot of these saws, including sliders, and I've avoided the sliders simply because I never felt that I had the stability to always give me a square cut. Now, I'm sure there's some of the more expensive saws and so on might do that, but I find this is works absolutely perfectly the way I've got it set up. Now, what I'm about to say is these are a one-purpose saw. And by that, I mean, you can set this up with the right blade, set the fences up, everything's perfectly square, and you'll get with everything set up properly, an absolutely gloriously smooth square cut. But what you cannot do is use this for breaking up rough lumber. I will never, ever break up rough stock on my miter saw, because that rough stock is never flat, it's never square, and so on. And as you sever a piece of wood, the chances of that piece of wood slamming into the fence when it pinches is just thrown the whole piece, the whole saw to whack. So at that point, I don't do it. Any of my rough cutting, as I talked on, that would have been Tuesday night, I use a jigsaw for rough cutting lumber, never my miter saw. This I consider is to be used, it's used for fine work. Now, from a safety perspective, that's important. You've got to remember to never cross your arms like so when you're working. I'm right-handed, so I'm going to be putting my stop, if I'm using a stop, up on this side here, while holding it down between the blade and the stop. That's important. You never, ever want to leave a piece of wood free-floating between a stop and the blade after it's been cut. The part has been cut. That's critical. If you forget and you lift the saw up and you're not holding it down, the part down, chances are it's going to lift up, jam against the blade, and potentially throw things out of square again. So that's one thing I'm very, very careful about.
Hey, Michael, this is Julie.
Yeah.
Can you mention the manufacturer again?
Oh, this is a DeWalt, and it's a double bevel.
Okay, I asked that also because isn't that what we have in the shop? Can an SA or
I
some
believe
very
it is.
knowledgeable.
Yeah.
Yeah,
What you may have in the shop is a single bevel. All right, I can't quite remember that detail, but and I've certainly had in previous years single bevel cuts.
well,
Cut to the
visually,
left and not to the
visually it
right.
looks just like that. So,
Yeah, it's
and
almost
for
identical.
for members that haven't been in the shop for a while, that may be helpful to know that we have the same thing.
Okay, so my
Thank you.
favorite saw. Now, I'm more often than not cutting multiple parts. I seem to make a lot of chairs and so on. So I'm often cutting legs and back legs and frame members and the rest of it, which involves multiple parts. So personally, I don't think that it's possible to take your tape measure or whatever tool you're using to measure and do two pencil ticks in the same place. So if I'm doing multiple parts, I always use a stop. And this fence here has a stop that slides back and forth. This is actually one for my big panel saw, but the one right behind you is it's probably a Craig, if I'm not mistaken. And there's a sliding stop on either side. So I won't switch the camera around to show you that. But when I'm cutting closer to my part, let's say my part is being cut here. Like so. I'm going to walk this down, put my part in here. I am not going to get my fingers closer than 4 inches. And if it's the parts I'm cutting are up against a stop and they're shorter than 4 inches, then I've made this tool here. And this is a hold down. I made a new one just for you. And I've got the sandpaper on the bottom. Yeah, great. Okay, let's take my knife and see if I can cut my way out of that. There we go. I've got a piece of sandpaper, fabric back sandpaper, that I can come in here and adequately hold that piece down like so. All right, I do have sandpaper on here. And at that point, the last thing you would ever want to do is cut through sandpaper with any cutting tool, whether it's the bandsaw, table saw, or the miter saw that we're talking about right here.
Can you turn it sideways a little bit too? So is that something you purchased or you made?
No, I've made that. It's a shop made thing. And it's got this nice little bump on it here, so that when it's stabilized here, but if I press down, all that force is directed directly to the point of at which the piece of wood is being held down. Any of the things that I'm using of this nature, push sticks and so on, they are always completely, totally accessible. Now, Tuesday night, I thought everything was painted orange, like fluorescent orange. I haven't got to that one yet because I just made it this morning. But shortly, that will also be fluorescent orange as well, which indicates it's a tool to be, or a push stick, or whatever you want to call it, that is used in a situation where it would be unsafe to do the procedure without it. So this is the stop that slides back and forth here. This, of course, will slide up to the end of the 8-foot section here. This as well hangs right here. So I'm not, casting about for my stops. Everything is held exactly, in close proximity to where I'm working. Now, I also want to point out another stop that's quite useful, and that's this. This is a piece of particle board. It can be hardwood if you choose, with 80 grit sandpaper bonded on it. And right at the end here, there's a chamfer on this surface and in this surface right here. So if I want to cut this part off, I need 2 parts. I can hold my stop down, hold this down. I'm going to turn this on, by the way. I stop in place. Bring this up. For the next part. So at that point, they are perfectly the same length. So if I wanted 3, 4, 6, 8, then I would be bringing my other stop in place. So kind of a nice shortcut when you're doing onesies and twosies is what it comes down to. Now, one of the drawbacks, but the reality of a saw like this is the throat plate is quite large. All right. If you're cutting a piece of something that has veneer on the underside, perhaps the top as well, as you're cutting through that, you run the risk of damaging the veneer that's on the underside. This is something that I've got a number of these in the shop here, and they're little T sections that look like so. Sorry, L sections. And so what this does, I can put a piece of fragile material in here that might have on it, and I can go ahead, and this surface here is backed up as well as this surface here. The top surface, of course, just the nature of the cut is the teeth are going into it, but on the bottom, of course, the teeth are coming out. So we would like a really nice surface here. And so that's what this is about. This is the remnant of something that started out this long. If you can see this, and I use it and nibble the end or cut it at an angle and so on. I also want to point out that these parts are simply glued together. There are no air nails or anything of that nature or screws. Murphy says that if you put an air nail in there, at some point, they're going to be cutting into it with your rather expensive saw blade. So I tend not to put myself in that position. So most useful.
Can I stop you for a minute?
Yeah.
Can you reiterate why you use a second piece of wood against the movable stop?
The second piece of wood against the movable stop.
Well, you had a stop at the outfeed, and then you talked about using a stop on the infeed as well.
Michael, I think she's talking about the long block that you just hung up on the wall.
Oh,
And it's
yes?
not my
Okay.
question. It
Okay.
came to me in cyberspace.
Okay. This is a stop extension, and what the stop will only go so far. All right, but if I want the dimension, I had a tape measure. This looks like it's about, well, I can tell you exactly what it is, 19.5 inches, because I've got a scale on here. But if I want a piece that's 9 inches long up against the stop, or I need a bunch of them, Then I'll put this in here like so and slide this back so I can measure between here and the blade. So this just allows my stop to go past the fence here that stops here. So it just gives me the option to cut shorter pieces. Without this, the shortest piece I can safely cut is about 19¼ inches. So with this, I can go down to whatever dimension I need. But using the same stop, this has a hinge on it that you see here that fits in this little notch right here. So did that answer the question?
It sure did. And I'm always thrilled to have a question from Mark Klein, because if he didn't totally get it, you know I'm lost. So I am now clear.
Okay, wonderful. Now, this piece here, if you do not want to, let's do this shorter one. Where did I put it? You guys have a task, and the task is to keep track of anything I put down.
Well, I think it's to your
You think
left on the
you
floor.
can just sit there and watch? No, you've got
I
help.
think it's to under your bench
Oh,
to
here
the
it is.
left.
Okay,
That one.
excellent. There it is, right there. Now, I may not want to nibble this thing here, but it's certainly going to cut it off. And you can see here. My part's going to get short really quick. So there's a nice way around that, and it's this little doodad right here. And hopefully you can see what I'm pointing out here. On this DeWalt, there's a stop that comes down, and that limits the travel of this saw. Without this little gizmo here, this little doodad I've made, this will always sever your piece off. But if I don't want my piece severed off, I'm going to take this, and I'm going to have to move the camera around for this. I'm going to put this in here. Now, I'm kind of hoping I can get in close enough, and hoping I can get some light on the subject. Ooh, look at this. So this is the small piece I made right here. And it's got a hook on it, and it's identified as saved. Little things like this look suspiciously like offcuts. They look suspiciously like scrap and will invariably get tossed out. So what this is doing is this sits in here like so and is held in place with a spring clamp like so. So what that does is it limits the vertical travel of this saw. So I'm going to make another cut. I'm going to have to move some stuff out of the way here. So if I want to make a cut, maybe it's an angled cut or a straight cut, but I don't want to sever my part here. That little piece we just put in there stops this from coming down all the way. So if we look at the back of that, this remains intact here, and this portion up here remains intact as well. Now I've got to remember to take that off, of course.
Can you give me an example of why you would use that? For what kind of product or joint or?
Yes, and I'm kind of getting there. Now, what we can do if we want to pick a number, let's say, well, it's going to snap in at 22.5 degrees. This will come down like so. What that allows me to do is put a stop over here, hold my piece down, perhaps back here. I always have to hold the piece between the stop and the blade, and make that cut with this piece intact. When I'm doing jigs for things and I want to duplicate a length on an angle cut, then if I just line this blade up with my cut, and I've got my stop set here, and this part has not been cut off, of course, then now I've got a permanent dimension at whatever angle I'm after here. And I'm going to go to angles now. One thing I haven't mentioned, and that certainly was brought forward when I used this L fence here. And of course it is that this saw, of course, the Satis travels that way, and hopefully is picked up by the receptacle back in this area here. When this is in place, you must have noticed that a lot of the sawdust hit here and went that way. Mm-hmm. So if you've got a lot of cutting to do with this type of L fence in place, then a good idea to bring in another vacuum port and sit it right here. So I'm going to pull out my little doodad here, hang it back on the wall, and that's essentially where it spends its life. Now, this saw is okay for carpentry in terms of using the protractor here, but for fine furniture, not accurate enough. So the way I generally measure bevels is this. If we want 22.5 degrees, I'm going to measure this at 22.5. There's 22.5 there. The tool I'm using is called a Bevel Boss. And the increments on here are actually in quarter degrees. This protractor here on the saw is single degrees. So now that I've got my tool set like so, I can bring this in and approximately line it up with the aluminum casting here. This gets you kind of close, is what it will do for you. But to get right bang on the money, I want to put in a piece of wood, and if I had one that was a little wider, it's so much the better. I can go ahead and cut this. and measure it with my bevel, like so. So I know that is 22 and a half degrees, which by the way, not what the saw is saying.
That was good. That was helpful to me. I have another question for you.
Yeah, shoot.
What is the advantage of using the miter saw versus the table saw with a sled for cutting small pieces?
If you don't have a miter saw, then you can do essentially the same thing with a sled or a gauge. A sled might be a little better, but on the other hand, you've got to consider human nature, and that is, and I'm going to talk a lot about the sleds a little later on this evening. But if you've got one or two cuts or one cut, it's kind of against human nature to walk over, pick up your sled, which is kind of heavy, slide the fence out of the way, put the sled on, and so on. So this is just such a nice, simple procedure that I tend to gravitate to the miter saw when I'm after small pieces or any pieces really that have to be absolutely either dead square or at a very, very precise angle. It's just so easy to do it on a miter saw. At least that's my perspective on that. The answer to that question.
Thank you.
Now, you'll see, I hope you can see, back in this area up here, there's all kinds of jigs and so on.
Michael?
Those are used with tremendous frequency. Yes.
Michael, could you tilt your camera up about 2 degrees?
Sure. Thank you for that instruction.
Thanks.
So now I'm going to move this over. I'll move this over here. So these are things that are used with great frequency is what it really amounts to. Now this miter saw goes up to 50 degrees. So it'll cut an angle up to 50. There's things that I've made over the years that will allow me to cut more severe angles, and that's it. So this is a jig that clamps down right to my machine here. If I need to cut a wedge, then I can take, I'm going to cut this off on the other the saw here. If I need to cut something that this saw will not do, I'll put this jig in place and I'll clamp it in place here. And hopefully you're looking at what's behind the saw here. There's a variety of clamps here that I use quite frequently on this machine. So rather than having to go search for a clamp, there's in this case there's 4 of these squeeze clamps like so that I can put in place, or I've got another one here that accommodates all the ribs and so on the back of this part. So if I want to cut that off at a severe angle, I can do that holding this in place like so. I'm not gonna hang this up, but it does live right over here.
I'm sorry, is that jig is for tapering?
That jig is for, you can't get this saw to make that cut in the conventional manner. It will only go up to 50 degrees. So all the numbers in this section right here, we can't get those unless you use that jig there. Now, I didn't point out, and I should have. Well, I'm going to do something similar right now. I do a number of pieces of furniture that have different thickness parts. Things like table legs, chair aprons, mitering into front legs. And the apron, pick a number, might be 3 inches wide, but the leg's only 2 1/4. But I've got to miter those, and it's certainly not going to be 45. So I'll do myself a drawing and determine what those two numbers are. And I've got a couple of pieces right here. So here's the thick piece right here. I'm going to put that in here. I'm going to cut this off. Just cut off the other end here. I'm going to clamp this in place, and I haven't mentioned it, and I should have, that there's sandpaper on the bottom of this jig here. Because remember, when you're using your saw, the blade is pulling the wood, and if the wood is trapped on the jig, it's going to pull the whole jig. So we're going to clamp this in place here. I just put a piece of wood down. What did I do with it? It looks just like that. Here it is right now. This is, where did that go?
I say that all the time.
Oh, here it is. Okay, here we go. So we're just going to cut the other end off. We've got it set for 45 here. Hope you've noticed that I'm letting the saw stop without raising it up. All right, so the blade comes to a complete stop, and only then do I lift it up. So we've got one side cut here at 45, and here is our thin side here. So we're going to bring this in here. We're going to clamp it in place. We're going to take our other part and we're going to clamp it here.
Michael, just as a time check, you're about 45 minutes in so far. I don't know that you heard me, Michael. You're about 45 minutes in.
Okay, good. Thank you. Those parts are now they're two different thicknesses, but the miter comes in at an angle 45 on this side and a different dimension on the other. So we've got two pieces that come to a nice miter that are two different thicknesses. So we're using a one cut here, and then our second complementary cut is clamped in place here. So there's essentially, when it comes down to it, no fussing about with trying to get the angle. It comes automatically from this jig. Look at my list here. I did, these saws do, of course, do compound cuts, but I tend to not do that. Instead, I'll clamp a jig here, like so. So this could be crown molding at 30 degrees. So rather than going to a chart, perhaps on the table saw that gives you a miter angle and then a blade tilt angle, and then almost invariably there's some fussing to come up with the true dimension. True numbers, but with this jig here, that gives me an angle that's truly 45 here, with this piece inclined in this case to 30 degrees. Now, just to talk about this jig here, these parts, this is another L jig here, and I've simply glued on, this is a L jig I'm pointing out here. This screen is behind me. In any case, this part here would be done on the bandsaw. That's way taller than what my table saw would cut at that angle. But of course, the bandsaw, you can tilt the table, and now you can cut an angle to the maximum capacity of your saw. And on a 14-inch saw, it's about 6.5 inches, whereas the table saw only goes maybe a max at 2 3/4 or 3 on a few saws. So these will hang up here.
Hey, Michael, a question. Yeah. So are the mitered faces of the two different thicknesses the same length?
How do you mean?
I don't know. I would have to interpret that.
Oh, sorry. I just cut that end off, by the way. So they're the same width this way. They can be whatever length you wish. It's just the thickness is different. So you can see here that one is different.
I was just wondering then, are the angles complementary? Like, so the thicker one, it's not like they meet at the long point and the short point on both faces?
They should, yes.
like when you
Yeah.
put them together, because one piece is thicker, a 45-degree face is going to be longer than a thinner piece.
That's right. That's
With-
why the
But with
thinner
that jig,
piece, that thinner piece gives you the longer face
uh,
to accommodate the length of the 45.
So Michael, is this something that we can delve into a little bit more in person?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Good.
We can
Bring
make
that
a
jig.
jig for the school to hang on the wall, which in a way, I'd like to and make some of these jigs that I find to be so useful. Here's one for a 15-degree compound cut here, and they're simple to make.
Okay.
All right. So we can move on. Any questions on the miter saw? I honestly don't know how I would work without one of these. I do a lot of chairs, and chairs involve compound angles and so on, and properly set up with the correct blade on it. These give you a pretty much a mirror finish is what it amounts to. And all blades are not created equal, to say the least. And it gets worse. There's actually a collection of DeWalt blades up there. Whoops. That you can see that I've bought over the years. Every time I buy one of these saws, they give you a saw blade with it. Not one of them's been used. They're hanging up on the wall there. I immediately put them aside and get my favorite blade, which is the 100 tooth miter Pro. Okay, so
Those are all the questions. So maybe
Yeah.
we should move on.
no more
That was-
questions.
Nope, that was it. And that was
Okay.
really great. I think of the chop saw as a rough cut chop tool. So
Yeah.
you have
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
helped me evolve, I believe.
Now, just to continue on that road, these in my shop, because they're used a lot, they last about maybe 6 years, maybe 7. And then I noticed there's some kind of a wiggle that starts to come into play. I mean, there's a pivot point down here. The pivot point is not a ball bearing pivot here, of course. So that'll loosen up. So I take one of the saws and put it in another part of the workshop where I might be, cutting something that doesn't require the level of accuracy that I'm getting out of this saw or the one directly over here. So there's 2 of them here.
Michael, not to delay us anymore because
Yeah.
we have 2 tools left for an hour, but
Yeah,
what is the manufacturer of the blades that you use?
Tenru. And let me
I'll put it.
show
in the
you
chat.
that.
I'll put it in the chat.
It's right here. There's the saw blade right there. It's a Miter Pro. Right
Someone
here.
put that, I think Mark put that in the chat, and I thought he just misspelled something.
Yeah,
Okay,
it's
that was a name.
TENRYU,
Okay.
and it's a 100 tooth.
Oh,
And that, I believe, is the important part. And they seem to last a long time. And because of the 100 tooth, they tend not to gum up the way a blade with 200 teeth will. All right, so this involves some change of scenery here. If it's, I think that's clear. You will see 4 drill presses here. And let me get my other camera. I have something to admit here, and it's this. I have a drill bit fetish. I've, over the years, collected more drill bits than I really do need. Now, why is that like that? Oh, here we go. All right, it just straightened itself out somehow. But in any case, this is a drill press I use most frequently. I'm 5'9", and you can see how tall that is, up to about here. Most drill presses are put on lower stands, or if it's a floor model drill press, it's just shorter. And because I like to work so closely, then I want my holes exactly where I need them. I find I can do that in a more comfortable manner, less strain on my back, certainly, if I simply put the whole drill press up higher. Now, one of the other things that, I do get to travel around and work in different workshops all over the world. And one of the things that I find really irritating when I'm working elsewhere is there's often honking great tables here. And that's not what I like. I like a small table so that I can get clamps like exactly where I need them, not way out at the perimeter of that large table. The other thing for me that's important is that these parts be discarded. I can discard them, so that I don't end up drilling multiple holes in the same place. You do that and you get all kinds of fiber blowout as a drill bit will exit into a previously bored hole. So my favorite is about the same size as the drill press table here. Now, we do some big projects here, so it would be awkward holding a long piece of wood here. So what I have done is this. I bought a stand that rolls up like this, and I can take a straight edge, of which there are a lot of them here, and I can adjust that so it's exactly the right location. So I can bring that up, and that piece is now supported as I'm sliding it back and forth like so. And of course, there's one on the other side as well. So my favorite way of dealing with long parts is to have this stand right here. Now, I'm often using a fence, and so maybe you can see this. These are also the fences for my router table right here. So there's a variety of different fences that some are used on the router table, some are used on the drill press. The ones on the drill press they're all here because it's so convenient. But the ones that are used on the drill press, there's some commonality to virtually all of them. And it's this. There's a rabbit on each one of these fences here. All right. There's sandpaper here, and this is 80 grit sandpaper. It's paperback sandpaper, so that when I'm setting up a fence and I'm drilling holes in a piece of wood, that perhaps I'm sliding along multiple holes, and so on, that that little chamfer, that or rabbit, I prefer a rabbit over a chamfer, that stops sawdust from accumulating in the corner here and moving my part away from the fence. So this one here can lay down, or it can stand up like so. So smooth surface here, sandpaper on this surface. There's a rabbit right there.
Michael, I appreciate that tip. I learned that a few weeks ago in Chip's router class. He does the same thing, has a rabbit at the bottom, and you have confirmed what I learned from Chip.
Yeah. Well,
Where did you think I picked that up?
It's just always nice to hear something for the second time. Then now it's cemented in my brain.
Yeah. There's a variety of long and short fences here. Another thing that's the drill press. If you've got one drill press, for example, there's a variety of ways of holding small parts. And this is one of my favorites here. Another nice little detail here are the magnets on the right on the side of the drill press. Otherwise, if I can't find my hearing aids, find my tape measure, find my pencil, and the rest of it, it's nice to know exactly where the key is, or should be, at least anyway. Up here.
Would you tilt your camera up a little bit, please?
Oh, sure.
About 5 degrees this time.
Okay.
Aha.
Better.
Yeah.
Now we can get in a little closer here too. So this is just your garden variety hand screw, like so. Inexpensive. And I've taken it over to the drill press. Over to the bandsaw, and cut a variety size 90 degree or 45 degree notches in here, so I can hold small parts securely. So I'll stick a drill in here. I'm going to walk around the other side and not trip over my tripod. Now, on the floor here, I've got a foot switch. And foot switch turns the you take your foot off and it stops. All right, so it's not an on off stop. You put your foot on it, turns on, you take your foot off, and it turns off. So what that allows me to do, of course, is hold anything down securely with one hand. and bore a hole like so. So this just simply hangs over here. Now the reason that I've got so many different drill presses is I also do a fair amount of metalworking as well. And so we're just going to wander over to this drill press here. And this is really the only one I've seen of this nature. This is a Ryobi. And what you're looking at on the bottom here is a cross speed, which is used in the metalworking industry. Now, this is a 4-inch cross speed, and for boring holes in metal or boring holes in wood for that matter. And you want the holes in line here. You can stick your piece of wood in here, if I can find one. Here's one I've used too frequently, but it'll give you the idea of what's going on here. We can put our piece of wood in here, and we can run this back and forth and drill holes in a line. And then this here, you can of course move the cross feed sideways. The good news to this is these cross feeds are ridiculously inexpensive. That one is somewhere in the neighborhood of about maybe $50, that sort of neighborhood, and I probably bought that from Harbor Freight. Here's another style here. No, that's not a cross feed, but this one does tilt. So boring holes, and it of course will clamp down to the table. If I'm boring holes in a shape that is at an angle, then that's a quite a handy vise to have. Now I do want to point this out, and it's this. A lot of these drill bits here are specifically sharpened by me. And that is one of the things that I'll show you how to do. And that's how to take a ridiculously inexpensive set of drills. We're talking a full set for $15 or something. And I can turn those drill bits into something that has an absolutely amazing cutting edge for wood. Here's my camera over here. Like so. Now, the way this works, it's done on your bench grinder, and we can't really do it here, but it makes a perfect in-person. And often when I'm doing this, people bring in their own sets of drill bits. And by the end of the session, they've learned how to do that themselves. So in any case, absolutely great trick. That center point is dead center. The two spurs that you create, if you can see that, cut wood fibers precisely going in and just as precisely exiting. So you end up with a hole exactly where you want it. You can draw crosshairs with your marking knife and then drill a hole exactly on the crosshair. Over here, all these little different boxes are all different types of drill bits. There's a metric set in there. There's a letter set in there. Quite a bunch of different drill bits. Forstner bits are wonderful. There's actually 2 sets here, and I recommend that. It does get a bit spendy, but here's a more Forstner set that's in 1/16 of an inch increments, and this is a set here in 1/8 of an inch increments. So that means up to, I think it's 2¼ inches, you've got 1/16 of an inch increments. And in different places here in my shelf, there's adjustable Forstner bits. If you need something that's somewhere between a 1/16 and an 1/8, anywhere in that range of sizes. So quite handy. Now I'm often customizing different countersinks and so on, which are generally square. Sometimes I don't want a countersink, I want a counterpore. So, which is a flat bottom rather than the angle to a countersink. So I will go ahead and regrind any tools that I need. And because they don't fit in the original format, I've just got them held in place here with a couple of magnetic strips right on the door here. So there's down here, and this is a working workshop, so and I can only spend so much time fussing and vacuuming and so on. Here's another range of different types of these are plug cutters. A number of the pieces I make involve different types of like a socket and plug style joint. Now, drill presses really drill holes in flat pieces of wood. But what happens when you want to drill holes on the end of a piece of wood? And so this is a jig here that we can't really do it in this short format, but here's a different drill press. This is a floor model drill press that I'm looking at here. This table, I got my camera in here. This table, of course, will go vertical. We could take this whole table and put it in a vertical position. And then this shop-made jig here, and I can certainly give you drawings and all the dimensions and so on to make one of these. So I'm just going to hang it on the edge of the table, which is not where it goes. The table is now swiveled into the vertical position. But what it does is it allows you to put a piece of wood in here. These slide back and forth in this direction. These slide up and down like so. And at that point, you can go ahead and cut tenons, round tenons or holes in the ends of things. That would be mounted in your drill press. And with the table in the vertical position and swung over, at that point, we'd be able to put a tenon, a round tenon, on the end of a piece of wood. Every jig I've ever made has a date on it, my name and a date. And this one is covered over, but this might, oh, there it is, sorry. This one was made in November of 1979. So these are not, jigs and so on that are discarded. They're used with some frequency. So hanging on the wall up behind the collection of drill presses are quite a number of drill press jigs, all through here, all numbered, or not numbered, but all identified for what it is they were made for. There's over here, the sideways position, but right here, that's a drill press, a small radial drill press. So it pulls out. It's on a sliding column, really, is what it is. And so it'll also swing around and go horizontal as well. Every once in a while, I want a perfectly square hole past the dimension that on this one is 8¼ inches, is 16.5 to the center point. But in any case, having that drill press head slide out has been useful on more than one occasion.
Michael,
Yeah.
on the list that you and I worked up some time ago, there are three things that I think that I still haven't heard you talk about. One is a
Okay.
drill sizer plate. One is a
thank
spring top for spaced holes along a diameter. And one is swing the table to find a line.
Okay, we're gonna deal with those. I'll deal with them all except the one with the equally spaced holes. And I was going over your list today and trying to find that jig. We'll have to do that as an in-person adventure, because I could not find the jig with a little spring mechanism on it in my inventory here. This is super useful, this little doodad right here. If I can identify it. Where is it? Oh, here it is, right here. Very, very inexpensive. You look at this collection of drill bits here, just sitting on the shelf there. What size are those drill bits? You don't really know. Sometimes you can read the identifying size, but more often than not, if it's a small drill bit, there's no room for the size. So this is something you can buy, and it identifies all the common drill bit sizes here. And you can also get the same plate for numbered drills or letter size drills, as well as metric, of course. So I keep that handy right where I can find it. Now, the trick we're going to do right now is kind of fun. We're going to put a table on here, and we will. I'm going to clamp on. My clamps are handy right here.
You realize that we can't see what you're doing?
Okay, there we go. I had to step around the camera here to get what I'm after. So I'm going to take a miscellaneous measurement here. I'm going to scribe line it. And I'm going to set this in a willy-nilly manner past my pencil line, my scribe line. And I'm going to bring my drill down, and we're not quite on the line. So I'm going to have to raise this up a bit. And I'm going to see if I can get in closer here. Tell me if that is too bleached out. Well, no, I can see this. I'm kind of after.
It's hard to see the crosshairs.
Well, what I'm after at this point is a specific distance. It could be 13
Okay.
sixteenths away from my fence here. And of course, there's a little rabbit right on the bottom here. And it says save a fence, because that could very well look pretty much like a piece of scrap, when in fact it's a fence that's nice and square with a rabbit on it. So what we're going to be doing here is this. So there is, we're off our hole, and I don't know if you can see that or not. Let's see what happens now. Let's get a better drill bit. This might. I'm just going to pull a big switcheroo on the drill bit here. This might help. So I'm going to take this off the tripod, and you can see the scribe line here, and we're off the scribe line. So what you might be tempted to do is undo one of the clamps here and try and move the fence. When in fact, there's a nicer way of doing it, and it's this. You simply undo your column just enough that will allow it to swing. And as it swings, we're close. We're absolutely on our scribe line there. Now you see we've got dust and little chips and stuff here. You pull this away and you see what we've got here, chips. So at that point, if we didn't have our rabbit there, that would hold our part off the fence. So that hole is right on the scribe line by simply rotating the table. So to start, just to mention it again, you just have to be kind of willy-nilly past your line slightly. And then as you rotate it, it'll get closer and closer until you hit exactly the scribe line. Okay. There was one item I mentioned I couldn't do as a demo because I couldn't find it. Was there another one there, Chip?
No, I think the only other one that I saw was the spring stop for spaced hole along a diameter.
Right. Okay. Yeah, then we'll have to do that. I'll locate it and bring it with me.
Okay.
Is a better solution for that.
Okay, you've got about 40 minutes left.
Okay, so now if there's any questions on the drill press. No, I haven't talked about things like speed, and the general notion is this, that the softer the material, the faster the drill bit goes. So if you're drilling basswood or poplar or something of that nature, then the drill bit should spin faster. And if you can see this up here, the large pulley at the front, and I could never remember that until on an early drill press, I wrote it on the front here, that when the pulley is on the largest, the V-belt, sorry, is on the largest pulley step here, that is going very slowly. And for soft materials, you want to move the belt to the larger, to the smaller pulley up here. So, and of course, opposite on the back of the drill press. Now, commonly, this is a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All generally, it's going to stay around here. So what I'm drilling here is a piece of cherry. So the third or fourth step will work for most hardwoods. If you're drilling metal, then at that point it will be on. You're drilling things like cast iron or steel, something of that nature. Then its pulley is generally on the largest one, which is down here. All right, rule of thumb. Things like countersinks and the rest of it. I've got quite a collection of different types of. There's a set right up at the top that was quite inexpensive that you can see there that gives me common drill sizes here. Screw sizes, sorry. So, a lot of fiddly stuff on a drill press, and maybe it's the nature of what I'm doing, but here's a set of drills here that are stubby drills, and on more than one occasion, that's been the perfect drill bit that I've needed. And we haven't talked about it, but you can put sanding mandrels in your drill press. And I have a spindle sander here, so I don't do that now, but certainly when I started woodworking, being able to put sanding mandrels like this one here in the drill press was allowed me to sand tight curves and so on without owning a spindle sander. I mentioned my fetish for drill bits and so on. Here's a variable cutter here that will cut any size hole, and that goes on the drill press at a slower speed, not probably the next step up rather than the slowest speed, but the next step, because you've got an awful lot of metal spinning there, and that weight is off center. But that tool cuts a gloriously true and clean hole. All right, so we're going to move over to the table saw, and I'm always making fun of the table saw because it's often is purchased first by woodworkers. The table saw is sort of synonymous with woodworking. When it's been my experience that when I started out that I couldn't use a table saw, it wouldn't fit in the space I had. So I gravitated towards a bandsaw, and thank goodness I did, because it's actually
got me going in a rather interesting direction, working with curves and irregular shapes, as I've done over the years. The drill press we're looking at here is a glorious table saw. This is referred to as a Rockwell U saw, and these were like incredibly popular in the 50s and 60s. And now with the saw stop technology and so on, you'll often see these, kind of not quite in a garage sale, but close to it. The fence on there was a Delta Uni fence, and I could put any fence my little heart desires on that saw. And my favorite up, down, and sideways is the fence that you see there, for a variety of different reasons. A lot of the jigs I'm using on the bandsaw will clip right onto that fence in a way that they will not on like a Biesmeyer fence or some of the other fences that are available. Now, when we talked about the bandsaw on Tuesday, I spent some time talking about aligning the blade, the upper wheel, to the table. It's not that different on the table saw. That blade should be aligned so it's cutting absolutely dead, and we're talking dead parallel to the miter saw. So that should be parallel to this. And there's different ways of doing it. The way I've chosen to align it here is this, and like the bandsaw, to align the table, you'll be underneath, and on this saw and most saws, there's 4 bolts in the 4 corners on the underside. And those are the bolts that are loosened, and the hole the bolt goes through is quite large. That gives you some latitude for aligning the top to the blade. I made my own a little doodad here. This goes on here. And these are super inexpensive. It's a little dial caliper. And clearly, with the saw unplugged, or I've got a switch right here, we want to set this, and I'm not going to go through the process, but I'm going to take one tooth here, and I'll identify that tooth that's pointing in this direction, right here. And so I'll set this so it reads 0 on my dial caliper. And then I'm going to take this, swing it around here, slide this over, and identify the same tooth. And at that point, I can undo my bolts here and run this back and forth, as I tap this with a leather or a rubber mallet until I've got perfect alignment from the front to the back on the same tooth. So here's my tooth there. I'd rotate this over like so to the same tooth back here. And I'll do that and adjust the top until I'm reading a perfect alignment. I don't know if you can buy those. If you can't, you should be able to. And this is the one I've made here. 2 pieces of nice wood here. I've got a slot cut in this here to adjust the to different table saws, because there's actually 3 table saws in here, and they make a great surface to put all your bandsaw jigs on. Just kidding. That's a bandsaw joke. Okay, so super useful tool that you can make in your shop. Now, and this is going to involve a little bit of traveling, but before we do that, I just want to talk about what you're looking at here. So there's a closed body saw here. There is a vacuum off to one side, and up, down, and sideways. My favorite vacuums for this type of thing are the Home Depot rigid vacuums. The shop vac, which is more common. On every shop vac I've ever owned, the switches fail. But some of the vacuums, the Home Depot rigid ones here, some of them are like 20 some odd years old, and they're working just as good now as they did when I started. But where I'm going with this is sawdust does generate an awful lot of dust. And so what I've done on the inside here, here's the port, and I haven't cleaned it out specifically for you, but what I want to show you is this. Inside, I've taken a piece of aluminum flashing that you can buy in any supply store, and it's not really showing up. But what I've done is I've folded it right on the middle of the flashing here, aluminum flashing. And it is sloped, so it goes right to the back of the table saw. And so as this sawdust cascades down, it ends up in that, it's really a hopper of sorts, and is directed right to the vacuum port at the back of the saw. Without that, you'd be surprised how quickly that whole thing will pack up. So just having a vacuum on your table saw makes an awful lot for me. Now, over here, this is a conveyor, a section of conveyor belt. And not expensive. That one was made by General International or something. But for ripping full sheets of plywood and so on, we can do that on this saw. It's adjustable for height because in some cases it has to drop below the surface, because there may be a runner that we're going to talk about in a few minutes that would hit the rollers. If they were not dropped by 3/8 of an inch. And so I've just got spacers on the floor that when I need that, pull the spacers out, the whole thing drops down. And so runners go right over top of the rollers here. And the beauty to this is, of course, it's an accordion. So you can close. So it takes maybe about 16 inches, maybe 18 inches of space behind your saw. That's been very useful for dealing with larger pieces of sheet good and so on. Now I'm just going to do a quick travel because we're on the same topic, and it's this. This is a Wadkin Bursgreen table saw here. This is kind of like the Jaguar of table saws, if you will, British made, no longer, unfortunately. But this is the table saw that I've had the longest. And so it was one of the few pieces of equipment that I bought new. And this one is sort of late 70s, that sort of neighborhood. I bought it right at the point where British manufacturing was collapsing, is what it amounts to. So another thing I want to point out is a table saw is kind of like the bandsaw. Bandsaw is not useful without a fence. Table saw is not useful without a really good and very accurate sled. So the reason I brought you in here is this.
this is another totally workable solution for an outfeed surface on your table saw. And of course, the other issue is when you slid this out, this can get quite heavy and it's hard to hold your part in place, slide that through the saw and not have it tip down. So by putting this in place, and there's no nuts, bolts, or anything required, that's now dead level. And the reason it's dead level is, if I can get it out, there we go. I've got some adjusters here that you find on, kind of cheap furniture and so on, that I can adjust those to give this working surface, to get it dead parallel with the top of my table saw.
Michael, we didn't see the adjusters. Could you maybe adjust
okay,
your
sure.
your camera a little bit and show those again?
Okay, I can do that.
Yeah, thank you.
Can you see that?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of a standard piece of hardware that you can find in any hardware store, is what it comes down to. And if this is going to make sense, this was my solution here for the hinge. So there's a bracket that's been machine screwed right to the back of the table saw, and I've got a pivot point right here. And this is all Baltic birch, so it's a nice stiff but workable support for the back of the table saw. There you go. So, like I said, I'm always making fun of the table saw, but in fact, the chairs I just made, I was just about to say something else, but the chairs I just made, we're working on 14 of them. The tables on the whole set of chairs, table saws, 3 of them, paid about 5% of the consumed about 5% of the time of the machining. Everything was pretty much done on the bandsaw for those chairs. So we're going to go back to the other room here. So now is perfectly aligned to the light slot. Then there's an incredible range of jigs that can come into play here. So Chip, you're going to have to coach me to make sure you can see what it is I'm doing.
Sure.
So this, by the way, is a right tilt table saw blade. And that was the way things were back in the 60s. So this is a jig, the table saw jig that cuts this angle right here at exactly 21 degrees. I'm going to go get my other tool here. So let's say we're going to make a whole bunch of the back legs of those chairs. So and I have never run into one table saw where the tractor is accurate enough. So I'm going to set this for 21 degrees right now. Again, my absolute favorite tool.
for measuring angles. So there's 21 right there. So you'll see instruction on putting your adjustable bevel on the top here like so. But that only gives you a maximum of about 2 3/4, maybe 3 inches. Instead, what I recommend you do is actually put this inside the saw body like so. And swing this around. So you're actually measuring inside the table saw. Well, that light just disappeared. Now, a little known fact though is table saw blades, good table saw blades are not flat. Good table saw blades, expensive blades, actually are a saucer shaped, believe it or not. And they only achieve true flat through centrifugal force is what it amounts to. So, no matter how accurate you are with this, and this is close, what we're doing is we're getting as close as humanly possible, making our cut, and then checking the actual cut with the but doing it this way will get you way closer to the true bevel angle. And I measured 21, and on this saw it is reading about 21 1/4 degrees, which for the procedure that I'm after would not be close enough.
So you prefer this over a digital gauge like a Wixie?
Absolutely. And the reason is the Wixie, you zero it out on the table saw, put it on the blade, and then start moving the blade. I find I can move that blade a significant amount in terms of before it jumps to the next number. And so that wiggleness, room for, kind of movement there between one number and the next is just not good enough. And, I've tried buying some, the most expensive Wixie style tool, and it was pretty much the same. So I've kind of gone back to my box like so, and then setting my tools according to that.
Thank you.
We're going to have some last few minute questions.
Okay.
Are you ready?
Now, yes.
No,
Yeah.
if you're not, we can wait.
You've only got 10
Do
minutes.
this because this an important little detail, and it's this. So here we go.
Oh, I'm sorry. I caught you right in the middle of it.
So here's a jig that's cleaving this surface off for me here. Now, I've spent a tremendous amount of time steam bending these parts. They're partially hand-shaped, and I will be cutting mortises on them and so on. But this would ordinarily slide back on the table saw. And quite easily, you can do this, all right? Your jig can slide off the fence and ruin your part. So what I've done here is I've made a doodad that traps my jig tight against the fence here. So this whole thing will only slide back and forth and cannot come off the fence. And what you see on the underside is this. All right, these bolts here, they tighten, that's a countersink. It spreads this apart, tightens it in the slot here. But if things go pear-shaped, of course, it would be inclined to go that way. So there's a positive stop that will not allow that to happen. So the whole thing is snug in the slot, but at the same time, it's trapped against the There's one other thing I want to point out. It's this, and that's how you make jigs that slide in the miter slot. And you can make jigs that are incredibly accurate this way. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring our fence over here. That gives us a parallel because this fence, that blade is set to this, and that fence is set to the same miter slot. So they're all going in exactly the same direction. So if I want to make a jig that's going to slide in the miter slot, I can put my piece of wood in here. But first, I'm going to put 4 little foam bits, like so. And that is going to press right in there like this. Those foam bits are pushing this piece of plywood underside of this piece of wood. So I take a bead of glue, run it down here, put this on here, and take whatever weight is appropriate to hold that down until the glue is set. And then at that point, this is now glued to that, and it's in line with the fence, which of course is in line with the miter slot. So I can go ahead and make any variety of jigs that are going to slide back and forth in the miter slot right here. Okay.
Michael?
And I'm ready for questions.
There was a question that was just raised a minute ago. Several people in the past have taught that the fence should maybe have a half a degree or a degree of tilt off to the right so that you're never pinching something. And other people advocate that this fence needs to be dead parallel to the miter slot. I think you just said dead parallel and no deviation from that.
Okay. Well, think of it this way. All right. So you've got the blade set absolutely perfectly vertical. All right. Now what happens? So if your piece of wood is dead vertical, raise this up. So that's going to give you a square cut. All right. What happens when your piece of wood is slightly cocked this way? What happens? You don't get a square cut. Because keep going. So, in my opinion, and based on what I'm doing and so on, which is often using jigs
And a lot of them are either sliding on the fence or sliding in the miter slot. It's got to be dead square. And
Okay.
the other issue is that, of course, some of the jigs are happening on the other side of the. And as soon as you start putting that fence essentially out of square, then you're going to get, at various times the back of the blade dragging on whatever it is you're doing. So I'm of the camp, if you will, that says that miter slot should be dead in line with the table saw blade.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question
Okay.
that asks, is there a table saw that you would recommend for a small home shop?
For a small home shop, that's an excellent question.
Thanks.
And the
Oh yeah, it wasn't mine.
table saw that I'm working on a home out west, and I've been working on this home out there for years, to the point where I have a workshop set up in the basement of that house. And I went out and I bought a rigid contractor's table saw, made my own sled for it and so on. I put on one of my favorite blades, which is a Tenru gold metal blade. That's the brand of Tenru blade. It's called a gold metal. And we're doing absolutely amazing work on a contractor's table saw with the right blade, and the blade is set dead in line with the miter slot. So yes.
Can you name the?
So
Can you mention the name? Can you name the?
A rigid table saw.
Okay.
Contractor saw, and it actually is right there, tucked in behind my big table saw. I've got an outdoor storage area, but I don't want to put that in there, so I actually keep it in the shop here. But I'm totally surprised. I like the fence on it. Maybe somebody's had other experiences with it, but the way I've got it set up, we're able to do, the required, incredibly accurate work on that saw out in the basement of that house.
I have a few more questions, and we just
Okay.
have 4 minutes, and want to respect people's time. So this one's kind of loaded, so maybe you can hit the high points.
Yeah.
Can you comment on riving knives, blade guards, and splitters?
Yes. I absolutely and recommend using those. The other table saw has a riving knife on it that moves with the blade. This old Rockwell does not. It's a fixed riving knife, so you can only use it in a square cut, which I not too often make square cuts. So I'm incredibly cautious about using the table saw for that reason. Now, when I am using the table saw, I never, ever, ever, ever put my hands over the blade. I'm automatically, I've trained myself to move my hands around the blade rather than coming into contact with even the back of the blade is what it amounts to. And on that note, if you can afford it, the SawStop is an excellent purchase. But I also have to point out, I saw somebody lose the tip of their finger on a SawStop. They had mounted, everything was done correctly. There was a dado set in the saw with the dado set cartridge and so on. And it's still, the fellow lost the tip of his finger, just turned it to hamburger is what it amounts to. So I also want to make the point now that the nature of how I work is that I cannot honestly remember the last time I took a piece of wood, like even a 2x4, and cut it down the middle. I just don't use the table saw for that. I don't think it's an efficient way of ripping wood. I rip all my wood on the bandsaw, put it through the joiner and planer. I'm of the opinion that a cut from a table saw blade does not make an adequate glue joint. So I automatically go to the bandsaw and if I'm creating a glue line. Yeah, it's I can rip a piece of wood, 2.5 inch thick white oak with a 0.5 horsepower motor on my bandsaw. You'd need at least a 3 horsepower motor on a table saw to do the same thing, and you run the risk of something going pear-shaped and having something come back at you, which is actually the larger number of accidents happen from kickback. You cannot get kickback on a bandsaw.
Any other questions there, Julie?
Mark Klein has one, but I lost track of when this question came up. Mark, do you want to mention how is something better than putting?
Just the one jig that you have the table leg or chair leg on.
Yep.
There's no runner on that, but you use that auxiliary piece that goes into the. Why wouldn't you put the runner on the sled itself? Like, why is that other piece?
Because why did I do that? The jig was kind of narrow, and I didn't really catch one of the miter slots to the point where I thought I should. And the other issue is I'm designing this piece as I'm going through the construction process, and I needed the latitude to change the setting, which once you fasten things down to the miter slot, then it's fixed. So this gave me a little bit of wiggle room when I was determining exactly where that intersection was.
So once you got it dialed in, you then made that other piece.
Yeah, if I can, using a sled here is, the better solution. It only travels back and forth, but on occasion that's just not possible. So I've come up with this solution to stop the jig from coming off the fence.
Cool.
Thank you.
Maybe
Any
one last
other-
question and then let's wrap it up.
Okay.
What size bandsaw blade do you rip with?
Almost invariably, my go-to blade is a 1/2 inch 3 TPI skip tooth blade. Now, if I'm doing big timbers, and we're talking, 8 inches thick and 12 inches thick and so on, then I'll use a 1 inch, 1 tooth per inch blade. And
Can you say the previous one again, and I'll put it in the chat?
Okay, it's my go-to blade is a 1/2 inch 3 TPI skip tooth blade. And I mentioned it on Tuesday, the bandsaw I'm using most frequently, those blades it's either $9 or $11 each. And there's the bandsaw I'm talking about here. So they're inexpensive blades. They're excellent blades made by American company Starrett, but they are welded by a very specific company for me that gives me like the ultimate weld is what it amounts to. Now, while we're on the topic, right in front of me here is a Rikon bandsaw, and it has a 5/8 blade on it. Same thing, same 3 TPI. And back in the far corner there's a 24-inch big Italian crude bandsaw, to say the least. And that has a 3/4 inch, might be, it's not 3 TPI, it's a little less than that. I can't quite remember. But I also do an awful lot of exotic woodwork. And when I'm doing the work on things like Macassar ebony, it's $160 a board foot. So the last thing I want to do is lose a lot of wood to dust. So, the 1/2 inch 3 TPI blade, that gives me an incredibly thin kerf. So I would never, ever, apart from the fact I don't do it anyway, I would never rip a piece of Macassar ebony on the table saw, because I'm losing too much material.
Okay,
Thank
well,
you.
it is after 11 o'clock on the East Coast where Michael is. So we're going to wrap this up. The next session will be September 20th, covering hand tools, the bench, drawing, a plate joiner, a domino, and fixing mistakes. And as you heard from Michael, his work is always full of curves, so expect him to pay particular attention to work holding methods. And
Yeah, is there a separate topic on that? I can't quite remember.
We'll talk offline.
Yeah, okay.
And so
the point I
Chip-
want to make there is that there's some things that have evolved over 50 years for holding unusual shapes that I'm honored to be able to share those.
And so that week, that's in 2 weeks, Chip, and that week, the classes are Monday and Wednesday night. Is that correct?
That's correct. Monday and Wednesday night, same time, Monday and Wednesday night. And don't forget the in-person sessions. There's still a few slots available.
And that's October 6th.
October 6th, correct.
How do we sign up for those?
Online.
Oh,
You log into the Guild's website, so make sure
Ah.
you're logged in, and then you're able to go to the calendar of classes, and then they're both of those sessions are there for October 6th.
okay, thank you.
Now,
They're basically, those two sessions are basically identical. So don't, there's no difference between one and the other.
between the morning and the afternoon.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay,
Well,
Okay.
thanks, Michael.
You're welcome. I hope
See you in almost 2
some
weeks.
of this was useful.
Absolutely.
Now, I also want to add that, trying to compress all this into a 2-hour time slot is tricky, to say the least. And that next tomorrow or in 3 days, you come up with a question. You can always get in touch with me directly, and I'll do what I can to answer the questions. Also, look at my webpage, and also I have an Instagram post as well that I keep up to date. And so you'll see a lot of design and construction details on Instagram.